Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
So a very interesting show that we have for you today, and that is that we will be discussing how the mob has taken over. We're not talking about the mafia mob. We're talking about mobs of young, zombie-like people who are fed, this is my opinion, who are fed one-liners that sound good and sound hip, and they want to get on the bandwagon when they don't understand the background and the history of the world and what happens when mobs take over. And when they have this one mantra that sounds simple and utopian and wonderful, and how deadly and dangerous it can be. The facts also that the biased left-wing media is hiding from you. We're going to be talking about that as well, and exposing a lot, again, of the facts that are being hidden from the public by left-wing media that has a different agenda. Now, if you've been listening to my show, you know that I am a person who is, yes, opinionated, and yes, I lean to the right. However, I like to hear what the left has to say, not so I can attack them, but so I can understand them, because they may have some very good points. I am not married to a right-wing ideology. I am, yes, married to the Torah, to what God says, to justice, because God demands justice. In fact, one of the 7 laws of Noah for all of mankind is that man institute courts of law, because you have to have societies where people, if they were wronged, if they were victimized, can go and get justice. Because otherwise you live in an evil society where the strong rule over the weak. And that's not what God wants. God wants justice. And that is actually what I believe that both sides have in common, is that we both want justice. However, I think one side is not getting all the information and history lessons that they need, and all sides are not getting all the facts that we need to hear. We'll be right back.
G'day, I'm Jono Vandor.
And I'm Ross Nichols.
Join us on our program, Israel on My Mind, a show that broadcasts all the weekly goodness that flows like milk and honey from the Holy Land straight into your ears with humorous and happy news stories.
New shows are posted every Thursday at 7 p.m. Israel time, highlighting the lighter side and advancing a positive view of Israel here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Well, the mob has taken over, and we are going to share facts with you and people even in this mob who are duped, who are demonstrating for something that they might be sorry for later, because it's been taken over by radicals, and we are going to be sharing the facts with you on this show that the biased left-wing media is hiding from you. Our guest today is Barry Shaw. He is the International Public Diplomacy Director at the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. He is a book author and has written several books, some of them entitled Fighting Hamas, BDS and Anti-Semitism, BDS for Idiots, and 1917 From Palestine to Israel. All of these books and all of his books are available on Amazon.com or at the Stamatsky bookstores in Israel. You can visit his website at theviewfromisrael.com. Welcome to the show, Barry Shaw.
Hi, Tamar. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I'm happy to have you on, and you say that you have a lot to share with our listeners about what's going on, not just in the United States now, but that has spread to other cities across the world.
Yes, exactly. Okay, well, like everybody else who saw the death of George Floyd, a black man, at the hands, or in this case, the knee of Derek Chauvin, a white cop, I was horrified by the incident. Like everybody else, it was clear that this was an incident that needed to be properly investigated and justice served. Like everybody else, I identified with the expressions of concern and sympathy at the rallies. But then things began to happen that troubled me. Justice began to be served with the arrest of the 4 police officers, and charges of murder were given pending investigation and trial. You're right, but rather than pacify the protest, Tamar, they got larger. They got more widespread, more violent. And I began to question and look into what was driving the hysteria. And I discovered some things that are sinister and dangerous was going on in America. Something I thought couldn't be possible in the greatest democracy in the world. The widespread protests were not spontaneous expressions of young people to a good cause. They were not leading the demonstrations, these people. They were the followers. They were the cannon fodder being used and manipulated by radical actors with malevolent mission to bring down America and beyond. Now, if you think this is melodramatic, I'm going to back it up with facts and information and evidence. I'm going to say this. There is a covert, symbiotic relationship with the mainstream media and, more importantly, with the Democratic local and state politicians. What we're seeing here, Tamar, is the perfect storm for a revolution. Black Lives Matter and Antifa have taken a legitimate protest and turned it into no less than an insurgency operation. People involved and professionals in counterterrorism will begin to know what I mean. They're basing it on the moral premise of racial injustice. But there's an insurgency operation going on in America, and it could lead to a civil war unless decisive action is taken to stop it. The demonstrations, I think you'll agree with me, have gotten way out of proportion. The premise of the protesters is systematic racism, and this is a lie, which, if you allow me later, I'll deal with. It has nothing to do with George Floyd. He's merely a catalyst. He's been left behind with the rest of the forgotten people, including blacks, the nameless dead who have been killed in the peaceful protests, left behind in the wake of something more serious, very serious, that is developing in America. Radical political changes being pressed by the progressive wing of the Democratic Party have now recruited action groups, including Black Lives Matter and Intifada, to spread the flames.
Antifa.
Antifa.
Go ahead.
And this part's becoming clear, all right? But what's not yet acknowledged is that Black Lives Matter and Antifa are the very definition of insurgency groups doing what the political echelon cannot do in a democratic society. So these insurgents do it for them. They dismantle structures of authority like the police. They activate physical violence to serve their political agenda, violence against the priests, and destruction of property, particularly the symbols of capitalism, banks, stores, businesses, the commercial heart of America, to bring America to its knees, city by city. And they sow discourse and bring local government no option but to do their bidding. This is not Nicaragua or Venezuela. This is the United States of America. And these are the tactics employed by insurgency groups in the Middle East. They infiltrate protests and hijack them. Peaceful protest becomes something very volatile that can change governments. This, Tamar, is an American intifada. And to prove my point, remember the Arab Spring of a decade ago? Do you know how it started? One man, a street trader in Tunisia, was shot by the police, and the whole of the Middle East went up in flames. How does this American insurgency begin? It began with one man, a petty criminal, George Floyd, who was shot by the police. In the Arab world, it began with peaceful protests over civil rights, organized by students in Tahrir Square in Cairo. But it ended up in mass riots and destruction led by the Muslim Brotherhood. Their original target were the police, but it degenerated to other property, and waves swept through the country, and it ended up with the Muslim Brotherhood sweeping to power in Egypt. This is what's happening in America today.
Yes, and I find it interesting that intifada and Antifa are so similar in how they sound.
Not really by default either. But Black Lives Matter, who has become the popular symbol for the protesters, is very similar to Islamic radical groups. They have studied and copied their tactics, groups like Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood, and even Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Black Lives Matter and Antifa are against family and they're against faith. The radicals have gone from indoctrinating college students into the primary schools now to brainwash younger kids about white privilege. They're turning these kids against their non-compliant parents who don't agree with them. We're watching, I don't know if you go online and you can look videos of hysterical teenagers, mainly girls, crying their eyes out on their selfie phones that they hate their parents. These people are ripping family values apart in America, and they're doing it deliberately. So basically, it's not surprising that their terror tactics work best in democratic states and cities, because they have their represented already implanted in city halls as court judges in the courts, and in the schools and the colleges. And America has been sleepwalking to its own destruction with the weakness and compliance of democratic politicians, as well as the enthusiastic compliance of others, including the media. And they've strengthened the hands of the insurgent radicals, and the compliant media has become the indoctrination arm of the movement. You can see this happening, but it's never been described in these terms. I think your listeners will begin to look at what's happening in America through a completely different perspective. The next stage, we already see. It's the defunding and disbanding of law enforcement to be replaced by what? By Black Lives Matter militia. They call them peace officers to fool the population by making it sound something more palatable. But what were they going to be? They will be armed vigilante gangs organized by Black Lives Matter and Antifa. Again, echoes of Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. The strategy, Tamar, is the same. Today, we have radical far left who have concocted the lie of systematic racism in America, systematic racism in the police force as the narrative to drive their insurgency and bring the masses to them. How do we know that this systematic racism is a lie? Because we have the statistics. Because as they blame the government, the issues of violence, of black deaths, take place in overwhelmingly democratic cities, in democratic states, not in Republican states. Black Lives Matter only applies, also you'll find out, if a black man is killed by a white cop. Never applies when whites are killed by blacks or even killed by black cops. Can I give you an example? We've got time for an example.
We have about
Tamar?
10 seconds.
How much?
10 seconds.
Well, okay, I want to leave this example to the next segment because I'm going to reveal to you the truth that counters the lies of the radical Democrats, Black Lives Matter, and Antifa.
All right. So everybody, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to call in. We are live. Our numbers are on the top of our homepage at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. We'll be right back.
Hi, everyone. This is Andrea Simento from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together, we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Simento, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
And me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
All right, we're back here at the Tamar Yonah Show on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com, and we're sharing with you today the facts that the biased left-wing media is hiding from us. And I like to listen to both sides. I often listen to Al Jazeera. I'll go to CNN. I'll go to France 24. I'll go to lots of different news agencies to see what they're reporting on because I want to understand both sides. And but I don't like it when there is an agenda with the news. And so we on the show are going to be giving you some things that you probably have not heard in other places so you can come to your own rational and educated decision. Our guest is Barry Shaw. He is the International Public Diplomacy Director at the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. And in the last segment, he was talking about some of the killings that have taken place. And Barry, why don't you take it from there?
All right. I want to make a point here I want to make a comparison here. We saw, and you could say quite justly, the outraging of protest with the death, the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. It went not only from Minneapolis, it went all around America and is projected all over the world as well. But I want to give you another case. 3 years ago, in the same city, Floyd was killed. Somebody else was killed. The name is Justine Damond. Justine was a white, Australian American. She had gone from Australia to live in America and in Minneapolis. Justine Damond was an innocent white woman who was shot dead by an African American cop outside her home. There was no protest for the death of a white woman at the hands of an African American cop. There weren't even any protests by the Me Too movement or the women's rights movement about the horrible death of a white woman by an African American cop. But you know where there was a protest in Minneapolis? It was by the members of the Somali community in Minneapolis, who, after the cop killer, Mohammed Noor, had received a prison sentence, were demanding that he be released because it was racist to keep him in prison. People were going around with signs saying, "Free Mohammed Noor." Nobody protested for this innocent white woman. This is the horrendous bias when it comes to people who are projecting a false narrative of systematic racism in the police, particularly in Minneapolis, a 100% Democratic-led city in a 100% Democratic state.
Okay, Barry, I want to stop you here just because, there is racism. There is racism here, there is racism there, but I think on a general level, the United States of America is the least. And I never remember there being such racial tensions besides the 1960s since Obama got in. But let's admit that there is, by some people, they have racist views, and nobody wants that, at least the good people. We all want to live together in peace. We want to respect each other. We want to tolerate each other. We want to learn from each other. We want to enjoy each other's different cultures as well. But what we both want is justice. And let's talk about the people who are marching today in these mobs who are wanting the good and yet being duped. They're not being given all the information because, as you were saying before, that these Arab Spring, which saw the slaughter of tens of thousands of people, and the fallings of government. Some of them, it was good that the governments fell because they were evil governments as well. But these people are being duped into something that might be the end of America, which stood for freedom, for human rights, into something that's going to spiral down into something that could be complete chaos, lack of law and order, crime rising. I mean, it's going to be like living in South Africa on steroids if you don't have police, if you don't have law and order.
I accept completely that there are racist incidents going on, not just in America, but other places as well. And obviously there's a problem about race that has to be questioned and solved, and it has to be done together, not with a divisive policy. For instance, I gave the example of a white woman where her death has never been questioned and the racism involved in that. You and I are Jews. There is racism against Jews all the time. It's called anti-Semitism.
Yes.
We do not take to the streets. We do not trash and burn buildings and assault the police, or even destroy commercial properties and things like that in our rage, right?
Correct.
One can question and solve race problems. This is not the way to do it. Now, I want to add, and in America, I deny that it is systematic racism because I've done the research and I'm going to give you some of the statistics, right? I'll start with this. Black death by cops has fallen 75% in the last 40 years in America. So there was this, and it's being reduced all the time. Maybe you have to have a protest to actually address it even further. Fine, but you can do this without killing people. David Dawn, people like David Dawn. David Dawn was shot by the protesters, by what CNN called the peaceful protesters, right? He was a 54-year-old black man, a former cop who was killed by looters while he was trying to protect a friend's shop. Has anybody gone out to protest the death of David Dawn, a black man, on behalf of looters and criminals while they're still taking to the streets? David Dawn is one of the 15 dead police and mainly black men who have been slaughtered while this peaceful protest against racism is going on. From 2017 to today, in America, cops have killed almost double the number of whites than blacks. 1,268 whites have been killed by blacks to 698 blacks killed by police. Despite the fact, and let's be honest, this is a true statistic, that blacks commit more than double the numbers of crimes than whites. Now, some people say, well, you've got to take it as a proportion of the population. Let's not confuse the issue. Let's not detract from the issue. We're talking about, if you call it racial deaths or racial attacks within the law enforcement community. So let's keep to those statistics. If you want to keep to a national statistic, according to FBI statistics in 2019, there were 10 million arrests in the United States. Police officers were involved in fatal shootings 1,004 times, 1,004 out of 10 million arrests. Of these, 41 were unarmed civilians. Wait for it. 9 were blacks. 19 were white. More whites were killed, unarmed whites were killed than unarmed blacks in 2019, according to the FBI. However, at the same time, in the same year, 2019, 89 cops were killed in the line of duty, the majority of them killed by blacks. So let's put this thing, like I said before, and like you said, quite right, racism has to be addressed. But there's racism going on both sides of the counter here. There's racism of whites against blacks. There's also racism of blacks against whites. And I mentioned them before. Black Lives Matter are part of the problem, not the solution.
All right. So, Barry, we're coming to the end. We only have another minute. And I would like to concentrate because you've given us facts and we appreciate that. I want to know, though, about people who are marching in these mobs who don't necessarily understand what the result is going to be when you, quote unquote, defund a police department in your city or destruct even, like in Minneapolis. They want to just take away their police and they're going to have citizens. I don't know what they have in mind, citizen patrols. And you're going to have the strong ruling over the weak. I mean, that's what I want to hear because people are not understanding what the results are going to be from their good intentions.
I'm going to come with that in the third check. How long have we got left on this segment?
And this segment, we have like around 30 seconds.
Right, okay, you made a very interesting point. Another thing that upsets me is the utter ignorance of the protesters who think they're marching on behalf of black Americans, but then vandalize memorials to Abraham Lincoln in Washington, D.C. and London. Did they do it out of protest against a statue or a monument for a white president? Don't they know that Lincoln was the Republican president that went to war on behalf of enslaved blacks, enslaved by the Democrats, that he was the pioneer for black freedom in America? And yet they vandalized his memorial. Sheer ignorance and vandalism of the protesters who don't know what they're protesting against.
Absolutely. That's the thing that I'm saying is that they don't know history. And if you don't know history, you're condemned to repeat it. All right, we'll be right back, everybody. Don't go anywhere.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
We live in the age of information, but not inspiration. If you're like me, you're looking to be inspired to reach higher, to connect more, and to grow. Well, if you want to get warm, you need to stand close to the fire. And if you want to catch fire, you need to stand close enough to get hit by the sparks. Join me, Penina Taylor, as we walk with people who have embarked on a spiritual journey towards Torah. We'll uncover what started them on their journey and what truths they discovered along the way. So prepare to be inspired as we take a leap of faith every Sunday at 5 p.m. on Israel News Talk Radio.
The mob has taken over, and we're giving you facts that the biased left-wing media, sadly, is hiding from all of us. And we have to understand where these demonstrations are going to take the United States of America. Will there be a civil war? I mean, some people are saying that there already is a civil war, and what's happening, and where will it take everybody? Our guest is Barry Shaw. He is the International Public Diplomacy Director at the Israel Institute for Strategic Studies. You can visit his website at theviewfromisrael.com, and he's here talking to us about this. So, Barry, a lot of people are marching. They have good intentions. They want to stop racism. That's a lofty cause. However, tagged onto this are parasitical type of organizations like these radical left-wing organizations that want to see the end of America and American values and Judean Christian values of family, of freedom, of human rights, etc.
Yeah, I think some of the people, particularly the younger people who've been marching, and they say quite rightly, if they really believe on the issue of racism as a problem that has to be solved, they should do it by violent protest. They should do it by sitting down and discussing it and solving it, just like the leaders should do, but aren't doing it. We came to the issue of wanting to abolish the cops. I'm going to ask your listeners in America, what message does this send to terrorists, a murderer, a rapist? And I appeal to sensible Democrats, because this is really happening in democratic cities and democratic state. Is this really what you want? Are you going to vote for this? There were 82 shootings in Chicago, another democratic city, last weekend. 23 dead in 48 hours. If you think that's bad, wait until Chicago doesn't have a police force there to protect you. Well, people don't understand that the policemen and women in every country, in every city, leave their homes to go out, not to go hunting down black men, but to solve crimes and to try and keep communities safe. That message has been totally lost in the last 8 to 10 days. I'll give you an example. Let me go back to Minneapolis. The majority of Minneapolis City Council, which has, by the way, Tamar, a progressive Jewish mayor, pledged to dismantle its police department. And one city councilwoman said, listen to this, we don't know what it's going to look like, but we'll work it out as we go along. You're going to live in a town with a city council who are going to disband your police force and work it out as we get along. This, by the way, is Ilan Omar's town. And I have a message to all sensible Minneapolis residents. Either vote Republican or get out of town fast.
Why?
Because if they stay there and they vote to perpetuate the progressive Democrats who are destroying their town by ridiculous and dangerous policies, you will find the civil war beginning not so much on a national level, but on a lawless level in cities, where Minneapolis will become another Baltimore or Ferguson.
Well, there are plenty of people living in Baltimore today who are going to the store and going to the mall and living their life. And so what's so terrible about that? I mean, yes, it's a dangerous city in some cases, but there's still a lot of families and schools. And
Tamar, would you like to live in Minneapolis and find men breaking into your home and you pick up the phone and there's no police force and they'll send you a social worker?
No, of course not. But I'm just saying that I think it's going to be worse than a place like Baltimore. I think it's going to be worse than South Africa is today with the crime, where people have to have not only gates around their communities and then their house, but also inside their house. I don't know if our listeners know that South Africans, many of them have to live with gates inside their house that lock the bedrooms away from the downstairs. So if their house is broken into, they can protect themselves while they're sleeping in their bedrooms. That there's another wrought iron gate that these criminals have to get through, and it's almost lawlessness there. So I want people to understand that before you destroy something, have something better planned. You can't just destroy it and then say, okay, well, we'll find our way, as our guest is saying, as Barry is saying. Go ahead, Barry. You have another 4 minutes until the end of the show.
Well, I agree with what you said completely. But what we're seeing here is basically a legacy of the Obama-Biden era, where Obama promised to fundamentally change America. And the radicals have already taken over some of the levers of power. Some of them are already in the House and in the Senate. They've been elected. I mentioned Ilhan Omar. She supports Black Lives Matter. Rashid Tlaib, she supports Black Lives Matter as well. But the fundamental changes is already going on while America's been sleepwalking and unaware of it. And the changes that are going to happen suddenly. And it's been strengthened by the protest movements that you're seeing today, just as I mentioned earlier on in the first segment, that it happened with the Arab Spring that drove the Muslim Brotherhood to power in Egypt. I think America is going to find itself in a situation where if you want to take any steps, it's going to be almost impossible, because you already have right now a Republican Senate and a Democratic House, and the Democrats' policy is to resist. This is going to get infinitely worse in America, whether the Democrats win or lose the November election, because the Democrat representation in power in Washington, D.C. will have more of the radical elements than they had before, as the old school die out or are voted out of office.
Interesting. So with the last couple of minutes that we have, how do you want to wrap this up? What do you want to leave everybody with?
I think that the people, particularly in America, but also in the world, ought to take a step back, take a breath, something that they say quite rightly they didn't give to George Floyd. But at the same time, you need to take a breath to really, truly assess of the undercurrent and not so undercurrent, because I'm giving you the statistics now out in the open, what is happening in America. And you have to take the steps in America to make sure that the police force, the law enforcement are not disbanded, are not underfunded, because these are the people at the end of the day that are there to protect every one of you, every man, woman, and children. If you lose your police force, you lose your country.
Yeah, it's just going to be like the Wild West on steroids as well. Everyone's going to have a gun.
It's not the Wild West, it's the anarchy that Black Lives Matter and Antifa are seeking.
Yeah, that's really scary. And I believe that these people who hate America don't care if they destroy people's lives, if they destroy the economy, if they make people lose their businesses or anything, because their goal is to bring down America, bring down Trump, bring down the United States, which is a bone in the throat of globalism, because America has its own value system and its constitution and doesn't go with a borderless world and no borders and no globalism, etc. Trump is out as a patriot, and they have to get rid of Trump and these American values in any way, and erase the history. Do not teach kids history, because then you can control them much better. Then they don't know and they can't see what's happened with things like this. Even as recent as you said, Barry, the Arab Spring, I think that was brilliant what you brought up. And I want to thank you very, very much for bringing us this information. and the urgency of it, and I would agree with you that people better get out of Dodge, because if this continues, if the police and the local governments do not take charge, and these mobs are free to keep looting and destroying and terrorizing people and businesses, then there's no future for you there. It's just too dangerous to live there. Barry, last 30 seconds.
All right. I think, as you said rightly, when I speak to counter-terror experts and counterinsurgency people, they agree with me 100%. But in the few seconds I'm left, I'm going to leave another issue, that the death of George Floyd may not be race-related, because Floyd and his cop killer, Chauvin, knew each other in the past. And I think when the case comes up to court, you may learn that it may not have been race-related death for George Floyd. It might be something else, which then puts the question, what were all these riots all about?
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. I want to thank you very much for coming on the show. Barry Shaw, again, if you want to follow him, you can follow him on Facebook. You can look him up on Facebook. You can go to his website, theviewfromisrael.com, and you can always write in with your comments or questions. You can agree. You can disagree. We're very tolerant here. We like to hear your opinions. We can learn from them, and we're very willing to do so. You can write me, Tamar, Tamar, at israelnewstalkradio.com. Barry Shaw, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Tamar.
And thank you all for listening.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling for the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.